Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Find a comfortable spot, perhaps with a cup of tea, and settle in. Today, we are journeying back in time to sit at the Roman table, not just to admire its splendors, but to uncover its hidden and often shocking truths. The crunch of a food should not be what we expect. It is not the crispness of fresh lettuce, but something else entirely. Something prepared in a tiny cage, a delicacy of fat and slumber. In conclusion, the disgusting truth about what ancient Romans actually ate is not a simple story of bizarre ingredients. It is a complex narrative of social class, ingenuity, and survival. The Roman diet was a direct reflection of their world. It was shaped by the need for preservation in an age without refrigeration, leading to the powerful, fermented taste of garum. Let us explore the concept of the cena further, specifically the social dynamics at play. A Roman dinner party was less about a friendly get-together and more about reinforcing social hierarchies. The host, or dominus, controlled every aspect of the evening. The seating arrangement on the triclinium couches was strictly determined by status. The role of slaves in the Roman culinary world was paramount and profoundly grim. The entire edifice of elite Roman dining, from the farm to the table, rested on the backs of enslaved people. In agricultural estates, slaves toiled to produce the grain, wine, and oil. In the kitchen, a specialized team of slaves, led by a head cook or archimandrus, would labor in smoky, difficult conditions to create the elaborate dishes. Let's reconsider the Roman love for combining sweet and savory flavors, a practice that defines much of their cuisine but often clashes with modern tastes. Apicius is filled with recipes that mix meat with fruit and honey. One recipe for hare calls for it to be stewed with pepper, herbs, onions, raisins, and defrutum, the sweet grape syrup. Another for roasted pork suggests a sauce made from apricots, honey, wine, and garum. The Roman attitude towards foreign foods was one of conquest and appropriation. As the empire expanded, new ingredients and culinary traditions were incorporated into their own. From Egypt, they imported dates and certain types of grain. From the Near East came pistachios, pomegranates, and chickens, which were originally an exotic bird. From Gaul, they learned about new methods of farming and animal husbandry, and even adopted certain Gallic-cured hams into their repertoire. The concept of a restaurant, in the modern sense of a place where one can choose from a menu of dishes prepared to order, did not truly exist in ancient Rome. The closest equivalents were the popini and copini. A popina was a type of working-class tavern or wine bar that served simple, pre-prepared food alongside drinks. They had a reputation for being seedy, frequented by laborers, slaves, and people of ill repute. Let's talk about the symbolism of certain foods. The egg, for instance, held a special place in Roman dining. The cena traditionally began with egg dishes, giving rise to the Roman expression ab ovo usque ad mala, meaning from the egg to the apples, which was the equivalent of our from start to finish, or from soup to nuts. The egg symbolized the beginning of the meal and, by extension, the beginning of life itself. The Roman use of herbs and greens was extensive and sophisticated. They cultivated a wide variety of herbs in their gardens, including parsley, mint, coriander, fennel, sage, and rosemary. These were not just used for flavor, but also for their perceived medicinal properties, in line with humoral theory. A common preparation was the mortem, the fresh cheese spread we mentioned earlier, which was essentially a vehicle for a large quantity of crushed garlic, parsley, coriander, and other herbs. The legacy of Roman bread making is more complex than just the gritty loaves of the poor. They were also skilled bakers who developed a variety of different bread types. For the wealthy, there was panis silaginius, a fine white bread made from the best quality wheat flour, a true status symbol. There was also panis austrerius, a bread specifically meant to be eaten with oysters. For the army, beyond hardtack, they sometimes made panis militaris, a more robust but still leavened bread. The Roman love for game meats extended beyond the familiar. While boar and venison were prized, they also hunted and consumed a wide variety of birds. Beyond the exotic peacocks and flamingos of the elite table, more common fowl like duck, goose, partridge, and pheasant were regularly eaten. Even small birds like thrushes and warblers were considered delicacies. Apicius gives numerous recipes for preparing these birds, often involving complex stuffings and rich sauces. Wine dark and thick as honey is poured. It is never drunk pure, that is the way of barbarians. It is cut with water, with spices, sometimes even with the sea itself, creating a beverage we would barely recognize. A fascinating insight into the Roman diet comes from the analysis of skeletal remains, a field known as paleodietary reconstruction. By analyzing the chemical isotopes, specifically carbon and nitrogen, in ancient bones, scientists can determine the general composition of a person's diet over their lifetime. Studies of skeletons from various Roman sites have confirmed much of what we know from other sources. The thermopolium of Pompeii that we mentioned provides a window not just into the food itself, but into the social life of the common Roman. These were not quiet, staid establishments. They were likely noisy, crowded, and vibrant hubs of social interaction for the lower classes. People would gather not just to eat, but to drink, gamble, and gossip. The walls of these establishments are sometimes covered in graffiti, recording everything from lovers' trysts to crude jokes to price lists. The Roman feast was also a stage for intellectual and artistic performance. The commissatio, or drinking party that followed the cena, was not simply a drunken revelry, though it could certainly become one. It was a structured event presided over by a rex bibendi, or king of the drinking, who was chosen by a roll of the dice. He would set the rules for the evening, such as the wine-to-water ratio and the number of cups each guest had to drink. This drinking was interspersed with entertainment. Let us examine the fruits of the Roman world more closely. Figs were perhaps the most beloved fruit, consumed fresh, dried, and even used to fatten geese for their livers. Grapes were, of course, central, eaten fresh or dried as raisins, but primarily cultivated for wine. Pomegranates, with their jewel-like seeds, were an exotic import from the East, prized for their beauty and tart flavor. Apples, pears, and plums were common orchard fruits. The Roman military diet's reliance on buxolatum, or hardtack, reveals a disgusting truth about the physical toll of being a soldier. This biscuit was made by baking a simple flour and water dough twice, which removed almost all moisture, making it incredibly hard but also extremely resistant to spoilage. It could last for months, a vital quality for long campaigns. However, it was notoriously difficult to eat. The concept of terroir, the idea that the local environment, including soil, climate, and geography, imparts a unique character to food and wine, was something the Romans intuitively understood. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder wrote at length about which regions produced the best-tasting varieties of different foods. The Roman approach to food preservation reveals their constant battle against time and decay. Beyond salting, drying, and smoking, they were masters of pickling. They would pickle not just cucumbers and other vegetables in brine or vinegar, but also fish, meats, and even artichoke hearts. Another key technique involved honey. Because of its high sugar concentration and natural antibacterial properties, honey was an excellent preservative. Let's delve into the economics of the Roman food trade. The sheer scale of feeding a city like Rome, with a population that may have reached 1 million people, was an unprecedented logistical challenge. The state-managed grain dole, the cura annii, was the largest part of this effort. Huge fleets of grain ships, subsidized by the state, sailed from the fertile provinces of Egypt and North Africa to the Roman port of Ostia. The disgusting truth of foodborne illness was a constant and deadly threat in the Roman world. Without an understanding of germ theory, food hygiene was rudimentary at best. Contamination of food and water with animal and human waste was common, leading to frequent outbreaks of diseases like typhoid and cholera. The heavy use of spices and preservatives like salt was not just about flavor. It was a desperate, and often ineffective, attempt to stave off the growth of harmful bacteria. We should not imagine the Roman diet as static. It evolved over the 1,000-year history of their civilization. In the early days of the Republic, the diet was famously austere, based on the simple fare of puls, vegetables, and cheese, reflecting the values of a small agrarian society. The later Republic and the imperial period, fueled by the wealth of conquest, saw the rise of the extravagant, spice-laden cuisine we've been discussing. This was the age of Apicius and the great banquets. A recipe is read aloud not from a book but from a scroll. The ingredients are a puzzle: flamingo brains, sow's womb, peacock tongue. Are these foods for hunger, or are they ingredients for a statement? The symbolism of bread in Roman society extended beyond the bread and circuses of the urban dole. Bread was a powerful symbol of civilization itself. The ability to cultivate grain, mill flour, and bake leavened bread was seen as a key distinction between civilized Romans and barbarian peoples, who were often stereotyped as subsisting on meat and milk. When examining Roman food, we find a peculiar absence, that of sugar, chili peppers, potatoes, and tomatoes. These ingredients, so fundamental to modern Italian and global cuisine, were all native to the Americas and were completely unknown to the ancient Romans. It is a fascinating exercise to imagine their food without them. There was no fiery heat from capsaicin, no tomato-based sauces for their pasta-like dishes, laganum, no potatoes to serve as a starchy staple. The Roman relationship with fat was practical and unashamed. In a world where calories were often scarce, fat was a prized source of energy. The primary cooking fats were olive oil in the Mediterranean heartland and lard, pork fat in the northern provinces, and for certain types of cooking. The Romans did not share our modern anxieties about dietary fat. In fact, they actively sought out fatty foods. We've seen their love for fattened dormice and the fatty livers of geese. Let's consider the beverages of Roman children. While adults diluted their wine, children were typically given water, milk, or a special sweetened drink called passum. Passum was a type of raisin wine, made from grapes that had been dried in the sun to concentrate their sugars. The resulting beverage was very sweet and had a low alcohol content, making it a suitable treat for children and also a popular cooking wine used in desserts and sauces. The popina, the Roman working-class tavern, deserves a closer look. These were often dark, small establishments, sometimes located in the less reputable parts of the city. While they served food and wine, they were also associated with activities that the Roman elite considered morally suspect: gambling, prostitution, and political conspiracy. The seating was often simple benches and tables, rather than the elegant couches of the triclinium. The food was hearty and cheap: stews, sausages, and bread. The visual presentation of food was an obsession for the Roman elite, often taking precedence over the actual taste. We've mentioned the Trojan boar and birds disguised as fish, but this culinary illusionism, or ars magirica, was a highly respected skill. A chef's reputation could be made on his ability to create fantastical presentations. Roman agricultural writers like Cato, Varro, and Columella provide an invaluable, if idealized, window into the production of their food. Their treatises cover every aspect of managing a farm or villa. They give detailed advice on when to plant and harvest crops, how to press olives and grapes, how to raise livestock, and even how to manage the slave workforce. The Roman diet was not universally the same across its vast empire. It was highly regional, adapted to local climates and available ingredients. While the Mediterranean triad of bread, wine, and oil was the cultural ideal, it was not the reality everywhere. In the cooler, wetter climate of Britain, for example, olive oil was an expensive import, and animal fats like lard and butter were more common for cooking. Beer was the everyday drink, not wine. The social ritual of gift-giving among Romans often involved food. During the festival of Saturnalia, a winter solstice celebration where social norms were temporarily upended, it was common to exchange gifts. A wealthy patron might give his clients a small basket, or sportula, containing food items like bread, cheese, and a piece of meat, or a small sum of money to buy food. These were tokens of his patronage and a reinforcement of the social bond. The connection between Roman food and their religion was deep and pervasive. Every formal meal in a Roman household would begin with a small offering to the household gods, the Lares and Penates. A small portion of the bread or a libation of wine would be placed in the hearth fire to honor these divine protectors of the home. Public religious festivals were centered around animal sacrifice. The grinding stone turns, hour after hour. It crushes not just grain, but grit and stone along with it. The daily bread of Rome was a testament to endurance, both for the baker and for the teeth of those who ate it. Let's reconsider the Roman love for garum from a nutritional perspective. In a diet that could be heavy on starchy grains, garum provided a powerful nutritional boost. It was incredibly rich in protein and amino acids, the building blocks of the body. It was also a good source of minerals. More importantly, it was a potent source of natural glutamate, the compound responsible for the umami taste. This fifth taste enhances satiety and makes other foods more palatable. The Roman kitchen was not just a place of cooking, but also a place of medicine preparation. The line between a chef and a pharmacist was often blurred. Many of the same ingredients, especially herbs and spices, were used for both culinary and medicinal purposes. A Roman cook might be asked to prepare a specific dish to help with a master's indigestion, or to create a herbal infusion to treat a cough. The archaeology of Roman trash provides some of the most disgusting but fascinating evidence of their diet. By excavating ancient garbage dumps and landfills, like the massive Monte Testaccio in Rome, archaeologists can reconstruct consumption patterns on an industrial scale. Monte Testaccio is an artificial hill made almost entirely from the broken shards of an estimated 53 million olive oil amphorae. Roman fishing techniques were varied and sophisticated, allowing them to exploit marine resources on a large scale. They used nets, lines with bronze hooks, and complex fixed traps called vivaria. A vivarium was a large enclosed saltwater pond, often built by wealthy seaside villa owners. These ponds allowed them to keep a ready supply of fresh fish and prized seafood like oysters and mussels. Some were incredibly elaborate, with channels and sluice gates to ensure proper water circulation. The concept of a picky eater would have been utterly foreign to the vast majority of the Roman population. For the poor, the choice was not what to eat, but whether one could eat at all. Famine and food shortages were a recurring threat, and survival depended on a willingness to eat whatever was available. This meant consuming coarse grains, foraged plants, and any source of protein one could find. The squeamishness that we can afford in our age of abundance was a luxury they did not have. The Roman love for shellfish was voracious. Oysters were particularly prized and were, much like today, considered a luxury appetizer and an aphrodisiac. The Romans even practiced ostreiculture, or oyster farming, to ensure a steady supply. Sergius Orata, a wealthy hydraulic engineer, became famous for creating artificial oyster beds in the 1st century BC. Let's consider the soundscape of a Roman meal. For the poor, it would be the simple sounds of a family in a cramped apartment, the bubbling of a pot, the grinding of grain, the noise of neighbors through a thin wall. For the elite, the cena was a multi-sensory experience. The sound was not just the clatter of dishes or the murmur of conversation. It was a curated performance. Musicians would play the lyre or the aulos, a double-reeded pipe. Poets would recite verses. The vomitorium myth aside, the Romans were indeed concerned with digestion and what we might call gut health, albeit through the lens of their humoral theory. Physicians like Celsus and Galen wrote extensively on the digestibility of different foods. They recommended starting a meal with light, laxative foods like lettuce or eggs to open the stomach, and ending with foods like apples that were thought to seal it. They understood that certain foods caused flatulence and indigestion and advised against them. The Roman table was a place of gender segregation. At a formal cena, only men would recline on the couches. Respectable women of the household might be present, but they would typically sit upright on chairs, a more modest and less leisurely posture. This physical separation reinforced the patriarchal structure of Roman society, where the public and formal spheres were dominated by men. The role of salt in the Roman world was so fundamental that it became embedded in their language and culture. Salt was not just a seasoning. It was the primary means of preservation for meat and fish, making it a strategic commodity as vital as grain. The Roman army required vast quantities of it to preserve rations for its soldiers. The word salary derives from the Latin salarium, which originally referred to the money given to Roman soldiers to buy salt, sal. A soldier on the march drinks from his flask. It is not water, but a sour, vinegary liquid that quenches thirst and kills microbes. This is the fuel of conquest, a taste as sharp as a gladius. The Roman concept of a snack is best represented by the items sold at street stalls or in the popani. These were not prepackaged, branded goods, but simple, ready-to-eat foods for people on the go. Small sausages, fried fish, hard-boiled eggs, chickpeas, and various pastries were the common fare. This culture of snacking and casual street-side eating was a feature of urban life. In the bustling, noisy streets of Rome, these quick, cheap, and convenient foods were the fuel that kept the city running. The Roman use of nuts was extensive, both as a food source and as an ingredient. Walnuts, hazelnuts, almonds, chestnuts, and pine nuts were all common. They were eaten on their own as a snack, often during the dessert course. They were also a key ingredient in many dishes. We've seen pine nuts used in the stuffing for dormice. They were also a primary component of mortem, the herbal cheese spread. In baking, ground almonds or other nuts could be used to create dense cakes and pastries. The Roman kitchen presented significant fire hazards, a disgusting truth of daily life, especially in the crowded city of Rome. Most cooking was done over open charcoal braziers. In the poorly built, timber-framed insulae, where the majority of the population lived, an unattended cooking fire could easily lead to a catastrophic blaze that could destroy an entire city block. The influence of Greek culinary traditions on Roman elite cuisine was immense. The Romans deeply admired Greek culture, and as they conquered the Greek world, they absorbed many of its customs. The practice of reclining at dinner, the symposium-style drinking party, and a focus on fish and seafood were all Hellenistic imports. Wealthy Romans would often employ Greek slaves as their head cooks, as they were considered to be more sophisticated and skilled. For the vast rural population of the Roman Empire, the diet was tied directly to the seasons and the agricultural calendar in a way that is hard for us to comprehend. Spring meant the arrival of fresh greens, young lambs, and the first cheeses of the year. Summer brought a bounty of fresh fruits and vegetables. Autumn was the time of the grape and olive harvests, the most intensive and important periods of the year. The Roman love for sauces was a defining feature of their cuisine. A piece of meat or fish was rarely served plain. It was almost always accompanied by a complex, flavorful sauce. These sauces were the primary vehicle for a chef's creativity. The cookbook of Apicius is, in essence, a book of sauces. A typical Roman sauce was a masterful balancing act of competing flavors. It would often start with a base of oil, wine, or vinegar. To this, the chef would add the salty, umami kick of garum. Let's explore the triclinium further. The U-shaped arrangement of 3 couches created a distinct social geography. The couch to the right was the lectus summus, highest couch. The one on the left was the lectus emus, lowest couch, and the one in the middle was the lectus medius, middle couch. The host and his family would typically occupy the lectus emus. The most honored guest would be placed on the lectus medius, at the locus consularis or consul's place, right next to the host. A disgusting but important aspect of Roman food sourcing was the use of human waste as fertilizer. Roman agricultural writers understood the value of manure for enriching the soil. While animal manure was preferred, they also advocated for the use of night soil, human excrement collected from latrines on their fields. This practice, while effective from an agricultural standpoint, created a significant public health risk. The Roman concept of vegetarianism was almost non-existent in the way we understand it today. While the diet of the poor was de facto largely vegetarian due to the expense of meat, the deliberate, ethical choice to abstain from meat was extremely rare. It was primarily associated with a few philosophical schools, like the Pythagoreans or the Neoplatonists, who believed in the transmigration of souls and thus saw eating meat as a form of cannibalism. The ancient city of Pompeii, frozen in time by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, offers the most vivid evidence of Roman food and dining. We find carbonized loaves of bread, still in the ovens. We find jars containing remnants of dried fruits and nuts. We find the kitchens of homes, villas, and thermopolia, complete with their pots, pans, and utensils. The ocean's harvest is not just of gleaming fish. It is of the intestines, the gills, the blood. These are not discarded but are seen as the very essence, the heart of a flavor that will define an era. As we conclude this deeper dive, the disgusting truth about Roman food reveals itself to be a story of context. The pungent decay of garum was the taste of preservation. The strange organs on the banquet table were the symbols of status. The gritty porridge of the poor was the bedrock of an empire. Their food was a direct answer to the questions their world posed. How do you feed 1 million people without refrigeration? How do you display power when everyone is jostling for position? We have touched upon the Roman practice of diluting their wine, but it is crucial to understand the cultural significance behind this act. For the Romans, as for the Greeks before them, the mixing of wine and water in the crater was a hallmark of civilization itself. It represented control, moderation, and intellect. Wine, in its pure form, was seen as a powerful, chaotic force that could lead to madness and violence. The conditum paradoxum, or surprise-spiced wine, offers a fantastic recipe for understanding the Roman love of artificiality. One recipe recorded by Apicius provides detailed instructions. First, a large quantity of honey is boiled with a small amount of wine. This mixture is skimmed to purify it. Then a sachet of powerful spices, pepper, mastic, bay leaf, saffron, is added, along with roasted date stones and the dates themselves, which have been soaked in wine. The Roman understanding of water quality was surprisingly sophisticated, even if their theories about it were incorrect. The architect and engineer Vitruvius, in his treatise, De Architectura, dedicated an entire section to finding and testing water sources for aqueducts. He advises against water from marshy areas, as it would be stagnant, and recommends sources from hills and northern-facing slopes. The lead pipes, or fistulae, that carried water into wealthy Roman homes represent a truly disgusting and insidious truth about their daily lives. Lead was an incredibly useful material for the Romans. It was cheap, abundant, malleable, and easy to work with. They used it for everything from plumbing and roofing to creating lead acetate, the sugar of lead, for sweetening wine. The problem, which they did not fully understand, is that lead is a cumulative neurotoxin. Pasca, the soldier's drink of sour wine and water, has a fascinating history that illustrates the Roman genius for practical solutions. While we've discussed its hydrating and antibacterial properties, its role in military discipline and morale is also important. The provision of pasca was a standard part of a soldier's rations, a guaranteed daily entitlement. This simple act reinforced the state's commitment to the welfare of its troops. The Roman public baths, or thermae, were not just for bathing. They were complex social centers that often included food and drink vendors. After exercising in the palestra and going through the sequence of heated rooms and cold plunges, a Roman might relax with a snack and a cup of wine. The larger bath complexes were like community centers, containing libraries, lecture halls, and gardens. The sale of food within these complexes was a lucrative business. When we imagine Roman drinking, we often think of the wild, orgiastic parties depicted in films. While debauchery certainly occurred, it is crucial to remember the ideal of the convivium, the Roman term for a banquet. The ideal convivium was not an orgy but a civilized gathering characterized by witty conversation, intellectual discussion, and moderation. The host was expected to provide not just good food and wine, but also a stimulating and pleasant atmosphere. The amphora, the humble clay jar used to transport wine, oil, and garum, is an unsung hero of the Roman food story. These were the shipping containers of the ancient world. Their design was a work of practical genius. The thick clay walls protected the contents from light and air. The two handles made them easy to lift and tie down, while the pointed base allowed them to be stacked efficiently in sand or in the holds of ships, and also served as a convenient handhold for pouring. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century AD had a profound impact on the food and diet of Europe. The complex, long-distance trade networks that brought Spanish garum and Egyptian grain to Rome collapsed. The intricate system of aqueducts and urban food distribution fell into disrepair. As a result, European cuisine became much more localized and simplified. The exotic spices of the East became incredibly rare and expensive. A market stall is piled high with greens, but also with things that wriggle and crawl. We have been taught to recoil, but for the Roman, this was merely another form of protein, another gift from the earth. It is worth exploring the Roman use of salt from a different angle, its role in religious ritual and symbolism. Salt was considered a pure and purifying substance, associated with incorruptibility and preservation. In religious sacrifices, a sacred salted flour mixture, the mola salsa, was sprinkled on the head of the animal victim to consecrate it. This act symbolically purified the offering before it was given to the gods. Let us circle back to the glorarium and the fattening of dormice. This practice, while seeming bizarrely specific, is part of a broader Roman culinary theme, the artificial enhancement of nature. The Romans were not content with animals as they found them. They sought to improve them for the table. They force-fed geese with figs to create ichor feccatum. They kept fish in vivaria to ensure their freshness and availability, and they confined dormice in dark pots to make them unnaturally fat. The Roman kitchen, the culina, was almost always located at the back of the house, far from the elegant reception rooms and the triclinium. This physical separation was also a social one. The kitchen was the domain of slaves, a place of heat, grime, and hard labor. The goal was to keep the smoke, smells, and noise of food preparation as far away from the master and his guests as possible. This created a stark division between the world of production and the world of consumption. The Roman diet, especially that of the poor, was often deficient in certain key nutrients, while being excessive in others. A diet heavy on grain, like puls and bread, could lead to a lack of essential vitamins and minerals found in fresh fruits, vegetables, and meat. This could result in conditions like anemia. Conversely, the diet was often excessively high in salt, due to the reliance on preserved foods and garum, which could contribute to hypertension. Let's consider the taste of alec, the sludge-like fish paste that was the cheap byproduct of garum production. While the liquid garum was the prized condiment, alec was the food of the masses. It was a thick, intensely salty and pungent paste made of the semi-decomposed fish solids left over from the fermentation process. It would have been spread on bread or mixed into porridge to add a blast of flavor and a much-needed source of protein and salt. The Roman feast was not just about eating. It was a form of competitive social display that could lead to financial ruin. Hosting an extravagant cena was incredibly expensive. The host had to procure rare ingredients, hire entertainers, and decorate his home lavishly. For the Roman elite, caught in a relentless cycle of social competition, throwing such parties was a necessity to maintain their status. However, this pressure could be immense. The role of women in the Roman kitchen varied greatly by social class. In a wealthy household, the domina or mistress of the house would oversee the kitchen slaves, plan the menus, and manage the pantry, but she would not perform the manual labor of cooking herself. Her role was managerial. In a poorer household, however, the woman of the house would be responsible for all the food preparation, grinding the grain, kneading the bread, and tending the cooking fire. The Roman palate had a notable affinity for sour flavors. Vinegar, acetum, was a kitchen staple, used not just for pickling but as a key flavoring agent in many sauces. It provided a sharp, acidic counterpoint to the sweetness of honey and the saltiness of garum, creating the agridolce profile they so enjoy. We've seen how a diluted form of vinegar, pasca, was the preferred drink of soldiers. The Roman market, or macelum, was the vibrant, chaotic heart of the city's food supply. This was not a sterile, packaged supermarket, but a bustling, open-air emporium of sights, sounds, and smells. Butchers would be chopping meat, fishmongers would be hawking their catch, and vendors would be shouting to attract customers to their stalls, which were piled high with vegetables, fruits, cheeses, and live poultry. The macellum was a place of incredible variety, but also of dubious hygiene. Let us explore the legionary, a food that is sometimes cited as an ancestor of modern pasta. Legionary was a simple dough made from flour and water, rolled out into thin sheets and then either fried or baked. It was not boiled like modern pasta. These crisp sheets of dough could then be layered with other ingredients, such as meat sauces, in a manner that vaguely resembles modern lasagna. Horace describes a simple meal of leeks, chickpeas, and legionary. A wealthy host laughs as his guests gasp. A roasted boar is carved open, and from its belly spill not stuffing, but live thrushes that fly around the dining room. This is the theater of the grotesque. The Roman calendar was filled with festivals and holidays, many of which had their own specific traditional foods. During the Parentalia in February, a festival to honor the family's ancestors, families would go to their ancestral tombs and share a meal, leaving offerings of bread, wine, and other foods for the spirits of the dead. During the spring festival of Cerealia, in honor of Ceres, the goddess of grain, bread, and cakes were a central part of the celebration. The physical evidence of the Roman diet can be found in the most intimate places, including the analysis of coprolites, fossilized human feces. While a disgusting source of information, coprolites are an archaeological goldmine. They provide direct, undigested evidence of a specific meal. Analysis of coprolites from Roman sites has revealed the tiny, undigested seeds of figs and grapes, the fragments of fish bones, and the bran from coarse grains. The Roman elite's obsession with freshness, when it came to certain luxury items, stood in stark contrast to their reliance on preserved foods. We've seen how they would watch a red mullet die at the table to guarantee its freshness. Similarly, for the wealthiest Romans, fish for a banquet would be transported live from the coast to their inland villas by a series of swift relays, an incredibly expensive undertaking. Foraging for wild foods remained an important, if often overlooked, part of the Roman diet, even for city dwellers. The countryside around Roman towns offered a variety of edible wild plants, mushrooms, snails, and small animals. For the rural poor, foraging was an essential way to supplement their meager diet. But even for the urban classes, certain foraged items were considered delicacies. Wild asparagus was prized over the cultivated version for its superior flavor. The panis gratilis, or stadium bread, is a curious footnote in the story of Roman food. This was a type of bread or cake that was thrown to the crowds during public games and spectacles in the amphitheater. It was part of the spartians, or sprinklings, where the sponsor of the games would shower the audience with tokens, snacks, or even live birds. This was a way for the emperor or a wealthy magistrate to display their generosity and curry favor with the masses. The Roman attitude towards leftovers was far from wasteful. In a world where food could be scarce, nothing was thrown away if it could be eaten. Both the rich and the poor would consume leftovers for their light daytime meals of intaculum and prandium. The satirist Juvenal complains about patrons who would serve their poor clients reheated, days-old leftovers while they themselves feasted on fresh, exquisite food. This highlights the social dimension of leftovers. They were a symbol of lower status. The Roman military's logistical train was a marvel of organization, and it was primarily dedicated to moving food. A Roman legion on the march was like a moving city that needed to be supplied. While they foraged and requisitioned food locally when possible, they could not rely on it. They were followed by a massive baggage train of mules and carts, carrying tents, equipment, and most importantly, tons of grain, bacon, and other preserved foodstuffs. Let's consider the flavor of Roman cheese more deeply. The dominant type, the hard, salty pecorino-style cheese, would have had a sharp, pungent, and intensely savory flavor. The aging process would concentrate the flavors and develop complex, nutty notes. The high salt content necessary for preservation would make it almost unpalatable to eat on its own in large quantities. Instead, it was typically grated over dishes, much like modern Parmesan, to add a burst of salty, umami flavor. The lighting in a Roman triclinium would have dramatically affected the dining experience. The The room was lit by oil lamps, which would have cast a flickering, uncertain light. This created an atmosphere of intimacy and shadow. The food on the table would not have been seen with the bright clarity of modern electric lighting. This soft, warm glow would have enhanced the sense of mystery and spectacle. The gilded platters and silver cups would have gleamed in the lamplight, adding to the luxurious atmosphere. The Roman concept of dessert, the second imensi, was not always a sweet course. While fruits and honeyed pastries were common, sometimes this course would feature savory items instead. These could be small, stimulating bites intended to accompany the heavy drinking that was to follow. Items like salted nuts, savory biscuits, or even certain types of shellfish might be served. This flexibility shows that the Roman meal structure was not as rigid as it sometimes seems. The poor man's porridge bubbles in a pot. It is the same meal he ate yesterday, and the same he will eat tomorrow. Its blandness is the constant, unassuming bedrock of the Roman world. The social shame associated with gluttony, despite the evidence of massive overindulgence, is a fascinating paradox of Roman culture. Roman moralists like Seneca and Musonius Rufus wrote scathing critiques of the decadent feasting habits of their peers. They saw gluttony as a sign of moral weakness, a lack of self-control, and a departure from the virtuous austerity of their ancestors. They argued that a true philosopher should eat a simple, healthful diet and not be a slave to his appetite. When we look at the legacy of Roman cuisine, we see that its influence is woven into the very fabric of European food, often in ways we don't recognize. The techniques they perfected for curing pork are the foundation of the entire European charcuterie tradition. Their methods of cheese-making evolved into the great artisanal cheeses of Italy, France, and Spain. The vineyards they planted in Gaul became the most famous wine regions in the world. The Roman army's impact on the diet of the provinces was transformative. When a legion was stationed in a place like Britain or Germany for an extended period, a whole support economy grew up around it. To feed the thousands of soldiers, local farmers were encouraged, or forced, to grow the crops the Romans preferred, like wheat. The soldiers themselves, upon retirement, were often granted plots of land in the provinces. Let's reconsider the sow's womb, a delicacy that seems particularly grotesque to modern sensibilities. Why was this specific organ so prized? In Roman culture, fertility was of paramount importance. The sow, which produces large litters, was a powerful symbol of fecundity. Eating the reproductive organs of such a fertile animal may have been thought to confer some of that vitality upon the diner. It was also a matter of texture. The Roman use of defrutum, the boiled-down grape syrup, had another, more sinister side. If this syrup was boiled in lead pots, which was a common practice, it would become heavily contaminated with lead acetate, or sugar of lead. This made the syrup even sweeter and was a cheap way to produce a powerful sweetener. Some historians believe that this lead-laced defrutum was a major source of chronic lead poisoning among the Roman elite who could afford it. The Roman meal was an opportunity for education, especially for the young. A wealthy Roman boy would attend a cena, not just to eat, but to learn. He would listen to the philosophical discussions and poetic recitations of the adult men. He would observe the complex rules of social etiquette. He would learn how to behave in polite society, how to converse wittily, and how to carry himself with the proper gravitas or dignity. The Roman love for patini reveals their appreciation for a type of dish we might recognize as a savory custard or a crustless quiche. A patina was a mixture of ingredients, chopped meat, fish, vegetables, or even brains, bound together with eggs and cooked in a shallow dish, the patina. Apicius provides numerous recipes for different patini. One famous version, the patina d'asparagus, features a puree of asparagus mixed with eggs, wine, and garum, creating a light soufflé-like dish. The Roman sewer system, like the Cloaca Maxima in Rome, was a marvel of engineering, but it was also a disgusting, open secret of their urban life. These sewers carried away not just storm water and waste from public latrines, but also the refuse from butcher shops, tanneries, and other industries. The smell in the vicinity of a sewer opening would have been appalling. While the system was effective at removing waste from the city center, It simply dumped it into the nearest river, like the Tiber. The Roman experience of taste was shaped by their medical theories. According to Galen, different tastes, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, had different humoral properties and thus different effects on the body. Sweet things were considered hot, while sour things were cold. A good chef, like a good doctor, would know how to combine these tastes to create a balanced and healthful dish. The end of a Roman cena could often do it. Consider the color of their sauces. Not the vibrant red of tomato, a fruit from another continent and another time, but the murky, complex brown of fermented fish and boiled down grape must. It was a place where the strict rules of society could be temporarily relaxed, and the baser human instincts could be allowed to surface. The disgusting end of the party was the flip side of its sophisticated beginning. The Roman use of fennel was widespread, and it exemplifies the multi-purpose nature of their ingredients. Fennel was used as a vegetable, with its bulbous base being cooked in stews or served as a side dish. Its fronds and seeds were used as an aromatic herb and spice, particularly with fish. It was also believed to have medicinal properties, thought to improve eyesight and aid digestion. The archaeological site of Vindolanda, a Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall in Britain, has yielded a treasure trove of information about the diet of soldiers on the empire's northern frontier. The anaerobic, waterlogged soil has preserved thousands of wooden writing tablets, which are like the letters and postcards of the ancient world. These tablets record official military business, but also personal correspondence. They contain shopping lists requesting bacon, ham, and wine. The Roman love of artifice in food extended to a desire to eat things out of season. Agriculturalists developed techniques to force vegetables to grow at unnatural times. They used cold frames with translucent sheets of mica to create a greenhouse effect, allowing them to grow cucumbers for the Emperor Tiberius even in the middle of winter. They also had methods for storing fruits like apples and quinces for long periods, so they could be enjoyed months after the harvest. The Roman tax system was deeply intertwined with food. A significant portion of taxes from the provinces was not paid in coin, but in kind, in the form of agricultural products. This was known as the annona. Provincial governors were responsible for collecting vast quantities of grain, olive oil, and wine, which were then shipped to Rome to supply the army and the urban population. This system turned the state into the largest food distributor in the ancient world. The Roman relationship with garlic was one of ambivalence. On the one hand, it was a common and essential flavoring for the food of the poor and the army. It was cheap, easy to grow, and believed to impart strength and health. Soldiers would chew on cloves of garlic before battle. On the other hand, its pungent smell was considered coarse and rustic by the refined upper classes. A person who reeked of garlic was seen as being of low social standing. The final legacy of garum is its mysterious disappearance. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the industrial-scale production and long-distance trade of garum ceased. While local, small-scale fish sauces continued to be made, the ubiquitous, empire-wide condiment vanished from the European palate for over a millennium. Why? The collapse of the Roman economy and the safety of its sea lanes made the trade impossible. When a Roman noble traveled, he did not leave his culinary preferences behind. A wealthy Roman moving to a new province as a governor or official would often bring his own cook and a supply of his favorite ingredients with him. His villa, whether in Britain or Syria, would be a small island of Roman culinary culture. He would attempt to recreate the feasts of the capital, serving Roman-style dishes made with a mixture of imported and local ingredients. The mulsum, the honeyed wine served as an aperitif, was more than just a pleasant drink. It was believed to have medicinal properties, acting as a digestive aid that prepared the stomach for the onslaught of food to come. The mixing of wine, a hot substance, and honey, also considered hot, made it a powerful stimulant according to humoral theory. Let us contemplate the textures of Roman food, which were often as challenging to our modern sensibilities as the flavors. They had an appreciation for textures that we often find unpleasant. They enjoyed the gelatinous quality of boiled cartilage and skin. They prized the soft, yielding texture of brains and certain organs. They seemed to enjoy a certain mushiness in their food, as evidenced by the prevalence of porridges and pureed pattening. Imagine a scent carried on the Mediterranean breeze, not of lavender or citrus, but something deeper, more pungent. A scent of the sea, of salt, and of profound, almost aggressive, transformation. The idea of freshness is a modern luxury. In Rome, the dominant flavors were of preservation. The sharpness of salt, the sourness of vinegar, the smoky caress of the fire, the funk of fermentation. The role of the parasitus, or parasite, at a Roman banquet is a disgusting social truth. This was a stock character in Roman society and literature. A man, usually of free but impoverished status, who would attach himself to a wealthy patron. In exchange for a seat at the dinner table, he would offer flattery, perform jokes, and endure humiliation for the entertainment of the other guests. He was a professional dinner guest, a living piece of entertainment. The Roman concept of food waste was very different from our own. While they were resourceful with leftovers, the extravagant banquets of the elite were, by their very nature, incredibly wasteful. The goal was to produce a superabundance of food, far more than the guests could possibly eat. This excess was a key part of the display of wealth. The uneaten food would likely be given to the household slaves, but the initial production was intentionally wasteful. The Roman love for gardens, or the hortus, was deeply connected to their food culture. Even a modest Roman house would have a small courtyard garden if possible. Here, they would grow essential herbs like parsley and mint, as well as some vegetables. A wealthy Roman's villa, however, would have an extensive and highly ornamental garden. These gardens were not just for pleasure, they were productive spaces. They would contain fruit orchards, vegetable patches, and fish ponds. The Roman table was a place where stories were told, not just with words, but with food. A dish like the Trojan boar was not just a roast. It was a retelling of a key story from the epic poems that formed the foundation of their culture. By presenting a pig that gave birth to a flock of birds, the host was making a witty, theatrical allusion to the Trojan horse, a story every educated guest would understand. This turned the meal into an intellectual game, a test of the guest's cultural literacy. The simple act of reclining to eat had profound physiological consequences. Eating while lying on one side is not conducive to efficient digestion. It can encourage acid reflux and makes it harder for the stomach to process a large quantity of food. This may, in part, explain the Roman tendency to eat to the point of discomfort and sickness. The very posture of their dining encouraged overindulgence and its unpleasant aftermath. We must remember the Romans who lived on the absolute margins of society, the beggars, the destitute, the people who had fallen through the cracks of the social safety net. For them, the diet was not about puls or bread, but about whatever they could scrounge. They would sift through the garbage heaps of the wealthy, looking for discarded food scraps. They would beg for morsels outside bakeries and taverns. Theirs was a diet of pure survival, characterized by constant hunger and uncertainty. The symbolism of the pig in Roman culture was twofold. On the one hand, the domesticated pig was a symbol of home, hearth, and rustic simplicity. It was the centerpiece of a simple farmer's feast. On the other hand, the wild boar was a symbol of untamed nature, a dangerous and formidable foe. To hunt and kill, a wild boar was a mark of aristocratic courage and martial prowess. The Romans' use of pepper reveals the astonishing reach of their trade networks. Black pepper does not grow in the Mediterranean. It is native to the Malabar coast of India. For this small, dried berry to end up on a Roman table, it had to travel thousands of miles. It was carried by ship across the Indian Ocean, up the Red Sea, overland by camel caravan to the Nile, and then by ship again to Rome. The food of Roman children, beyond the passum drink, was generally simple. They would eat versions of what the adults ate, but with less spice and no wine. A child's diet would be based on bread, porridge, fruits, and vegetables. The Roman concern for child rearing, as seen in the writings of Cato and others, emphasized a wholesome, simple diet to build a strong body and a virtuous character. The Roman taberna, distinct from a popina, was primarily a retail shop, but many also sold food and drink. These were small, one-room shops that opened directly onto the street, with a wide counter at the front. A baker might sell his loaves from a taberna, or a vintner his wine. Some would offer simple, ready-to-eat snacks for passers-by. The ruins of Pompeii and Ostia are lined with these shops, giving us a clear sense of the commercial vitality of a Roman street. A silver spoon dips into a dish. It is a test of status, a display of wealth. But the food it carries is a challenge, a testament to a palate that embraced flavors we have long since tried to forget. The Roman palate for bitterness is an interesting and often overlooked aspect of their cuisine. While they loved sweet, sour, and salty flavors, they did not shy away from bitterness. They ate bitter greens like chicory and endive in their salads. They used bitter herbs in their cooking. The taste of certain olive oils could be quite bitter. They even seemed to find a certain appeal in the bitterness of some wines. The final meal of a gladiator was a specific and ritualized affair. On the night before they were to fight in the arena, the gladiators were given a feast known as the cena libera, or free dinner. This was a public event where citizens could come and watch these men, who were about to face death, eat their last meal. The food was typically hearty and of good quality, a final indulgence before the ordeal to come. The atmosphere was a strange mixture of feasting and morbidity. In reflecting upon the Roman diet, we are forced to confront the relativity of the term disgusting. The dormouse, the garum, the sow's womb, these strike us as repulsive because they fall outside the narrow confines of our own learned culinary traditions. Yet, for the Romans, these were staples, delicacies, and symbols deeply woven into the fabric of their lives. What they would find truly disgusting is a question worth pondering. The most profound legacy of Roman food is arguably not an ingredient or a dish, but an idea. The idea of cuisine as a form of cultural identity. The Romans used food to define who they were. To eat bread and drink wine was to be civilized. To recline at a banquet and discuss poetry was to be Roman. They exported this culinary identity to the farthest corners of their empire, using it as a tool of assimilation and a symbol of their power. The story of Roman food is, in the end, a story about resourcefulness in the face of constraints. Every disgusting element we have explored was a clever solution to a problem. How do you get protein and flavor from fish in a world without refrigeration? You ferment it into garum. How do you make a bland grain porridge palatable for centuries? You add a dash of garum. How do you make use of every part of a precious animal? You create delicacies from the organs and entrails. When we strip away the sensationalism of the exotic feasts, the true daily diet of the average Roman emerges as a model of what we would today call the Mediterranean diet. It was based on whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and fruits. Its primary fat source was olive oil. Meat was consumed sparingly, with fish and cheese providing more regular sources of animal protein. The Roman banquet, the cena, was an exercise in escapism. For a few precious hours in the flickering lamplight of the triclinium, the Roman elite could escape the noise, the squalor, and the political anxieties of their world. They could enter a carefully constructed fantasy, a world of exotic flavors, beautiful entertainment, and witty conversation. The ghost of Roman cuisine still haunts our language. When we speak of a salary, we are unknowingly referencing the Roman soldier's allowance for salt. When we use the word companion, we are invoking its Latin root, companes, meaning one with whom you share bread. The very word library has a distant echo in the liber, or inner bark of a tree that was used for writing, just as the bark of a cork tree gave its name to the Roman cook's cortex, or knife. The Roman fascination with aphrodisiacs is a recurring theme in their food culture. They believed that certain foods could stimulate sexual desire and improve performance. Prized seafood like oysters and sea urchins were thought to have powerful aphrodisiac qualities. Certain herbs and spices, like satyrion, a type of orchid, and arugula, were also consumed for this purpose. This belief highlights the Roman connection between food and the body's other physical appetites. the fall of Rome did not completely erase its culinary knowledge. The monasteries of the early Middle Ages became crucial repositories of ancient learning, including agricultural and viticultural techniques. Monks painstakingly copied the works of Roman agricultural writers, preserving their knowledge of crop rotation, grafting, and winemaking. The great monastic estates continued to practice a form of Roman-style agriculture, maintaining vineyards and olive groves. The street food vendor calls out his wares: small sausages, cooked chickpeas, pastries dripping with honey. This is the pulse of the city, the quick, cheap fuel for the bustling masses of the capital. Let's consider the simple act of sharing a meal. For the Romans, as for us, it was a fundamental act of social bonding. The convivium was not just about showing off. At its best, it was about reinforcing friendships and forging alliances. The family meal, however simple, was a daily ritual that strengthened kinship ties. The Roman understanding of flavor was inherently synthetic. They were not purists. Their goal was not to make a fish taste more like a fish, but to use the fish as a canvas upon which to paint a complex masterpiece of sauce. The main ingredient was often just a vehicle for the elaborate combination of garum, honey, vinegar, and spices. The disgusting truth of Roman food is, ultimately, a story of power. The power of the state to feed 1 million people through the grain dole. The power of a host to command the rarest ingredients from across the known world. The power of a chef to transform nature into artifice. The power of the Roman palate to impose its preferences on conquered peoples. The absence of chili peppers in the Roman diet meant the absence of a certain kind of hot. Their spiciness came from black pepper and ginger, which provide a warm, aromatic heat, but not the sharp, fiery burn of capsaicin. This gave their food a different kind of intensity. It was a deep, complex, and pungent intensity from fermentation and spice, but it lacked the immediate, almost violent, kick that we associate with spicy food today. As we look back at the Roman table, we see a world of profound contradictions. It was a place of incredible sophistication and brutal gluttony. It was a system that could feed an empire, yet allowed people to starve in the streets of its capital. It was a cuisine that celebrated the simple, rustic fare of the farmer, while its elite pursued the most unnatural and extravagant dishes imaginable. These contradictions are not a sign of failure, but a mark of humanity. The story of what the Romans ate is a powerful reminder that our tastes are not innate, they are learned. We are conditioned by our culture, our environment, and our history to find certain flavors pleasant and others repulsive. The Romans learned to love the taste of fermentation because it was the taste of survival. They learned to crave exotic birds because it was the taste of status. A physician writes of diet and health. He speaks of humors of balancing the hot and the cold, the moist and the dry. Food was not just sustenance, it was medicine and sometimes a delicate poison. The sea urchin is cracked open on the docks. Its briny, custardy interior is eaten raw, a fleeting taste of the ocean, a luxury for those who could afford it fresh from the waves. In the glorarium, a special terracotta pot, a small creature is fattened in darkness. It is fed on walnuts and chestnuts, growing plump for the day it will be cooked and served as a single, crunchy bite. The word disgusting is a judgment from our time. To them, it was simply food. It was a map of their world, a reflection of their ingenuity, their brutality, their resourcefulness, and their unshakable confidence. Look beyond the banquet. The true Roman diet is found in the archaeological remains of drains and latrines. Here, the undigested seeds, the tiny fish bones, tell a story free from the poet's exaggeration. An amphora sealed with pitch is opened after a long sea voyage. The contents are not spoiled but transformed. The pungent aroma that fills the air is the smell of commerce, of a connected empire. Spices from the far corners of the known world pile high in the market. Pepper, cloves, ginger. They are worth more than gold, used to create a fantasy of flavor, to display unimaginable wealth. Picture terracotta jars lining a sun-beaten courtyard. They are not filled with wine or oil, but with a churning, evolving secret. A liquid alchemy born from death and decay, destined for the emperor's plate. The wealthy Roman palate craved the unnatural, a fish that tastes of meat, a bird that is disguised as a fish. The culinary arts were a game of illusion, of tricking the senses of jaded diners. The smoke from a charcoal brazier fills a small apartment in an insula. The taste of smoke is in everything, a constant reminder of the cramped, dangerous, and vibrant reality of urban Roman life. The sweetness of honey is everywhere, from glazing roasted meats to sweetening wine and desserts. Without sugar, the bee was the master of confections, its product a vital staple in the Roman pantry. A cheese is unwrapped from its brine-soaked cloth. It is hard, salty, and pungent, designed for travel and longevity. This is the ancestor of pecorino, a taste of the shepherd's life on the hillsides. They ate things from the sky, from the sea, and from beneath the earth. They were culinary explorers, bound not by our rules of what is and is not edible, but by a relentless drive to consume the world. The cookbook of Apicius is not for the faint of heart. It is a document of extreme cuisine, where the line between gourmet and grotesque is blurred with every elaborate, spice-laden instruction. Imagine the taste of a mouthful of history. It would be overwhelmingly salty, surprisingly sour, and carry a deep, lingering, fermented undertone that speaks of a world without refrigeration. The offal, the entrails, the less loved parts, were not merely for the poor. Prepared with elaborate sauces and spices, tripe and udders could become the centerpiece of a rich man's dinner. The olive tree was sacred, and its oil was life. It was used for cooking, for light, for cleaning the body. Its flavor, from green and peppery to mild and golden, was a foundation of their diet. A food's value was often tied to its artificiality. The more a dish was processed, disguised, and transformed from its natural state, the more it demonstrated the host's power over nature itself. In the heart of the Roman kitchen, shadows dance on stone walls. Here, flavors are not just combined, they are battled, conquered, and masked. What is hidden beneath the honey, the pepper, the herbs? A legionary chews on hardtack, a biscuit of flour and water baked twice until it is as hard as a rock. It is monotonous, but it is reliable. This is the food that built and sustained an empire. The hunt for exotic flavors was relentless. They sought out strange sea creatures, rare birds, and animals from the farthest provinces, all to satisfy a restless and insatiable curiosity on the plate. The concept of a balanced meal was alien. A Roman banquet was a parade of dishes, a chaotic assault on the senses, with sweet, savory, and sour all mingling on the same table at the same time. The amphorae that held their potent fish sauce were the plastic bottles of their day. They were disposable, ubiquitous, and their broken shards still litter the landscapes and seabeds of the former empire. In the vomitorium, a space for purging, the cycle of consumption and excess is laid bare. It is a symbol of a culture so rich it could afford to waste, to consume for pleasure beyond all reason. The bread dole, the panem of panem et circenses, was a political tool. A full belly meant a docile populace. The flavor of this bread was the flavor of civic control and social order. Let us not judge them with our palates, but understand them with our minds. Their food was a direct response to their environment. A world without canning, without refrigeration, without our modern certainties. The Roman table was a microcosm of Roman society. It was a place of extreme social stratification, of incredible ingenuity, of brutal spectacle, and of surprising moments of simple, shared humanity. The flamingo was not just admired for its plumage, it was pursued for its tongue. A delicacy so rare and so specific it speaks volumes about the Roman elite's search for novelty at any cost. The truth of what they ate is not found in a single dish, but in the entire spectrum. From the gritty porridge of the plebeian to the peacock brains of the senator, it tells the whole story of Rome. The feast is a performance, a spectacle of power. But look closer, past the gilded platters and the shimmering goblets. See the strangeness, the challenge to our modern palates, the dish designed to test courage as much as taste. So as we pull back the curtain on the Roman dining room, be prepared. The truth is not always elegant. It is often visceral, challenging, and yes, sometimes truly disgusting. But it is always fascinating. The single most important flavor in the entire Roman world, the taste that defined their cuisine from the legionaries' camp to the emperor's palace, came from a substance we would find profoundly repulsive. It was called garum or liquamen. To understand Roman food, we must first understand this. Garum was not a simple fish sauce. It was a potent, fermented, liquid alchemy. The process of its creation is where our modern sensibilities are most challenged. The disgusting process of creating garum yielded a product of surprising complexity and immense commercial value. Not all garum was created equal. The highest quality, known as flows gari or flour of garum, was the first liquid that ran off the fermenting fish, prized for its clarity and delicate if still intense flavor. It could fetch astronomical prices, equivalent to the finest perfumes. A more common grade was the standard liquamen, the backbone of daily cooking. While the elite experimented with exotic flavors, the vast majority of Rome's population, the plebeians who crammed into the city's apartment blocks or toiled on rural farms, subsisted on a diet that was monotonous and starkly simple. Their cornerstone meal was not a lavish roast, but a humble porridge called puls. Puls was, in essence, a thick gruel made from boiled grains. Alongside puls, the other pillar of the common Roman's diet was panis, or bread. Bread was so fundamental to Roman life that its provision became a matter of state policy. The cura annii, or grain dole, was a system established to distribute free or subsidized grain, and later baked bread, to the citizens of Rome. Now let us turn to the tables of the fabulously wealthy, where the concept of disgusting shifts from the reality of decay to the theater of excess. Here, one of the most famous and unsettling delicacies was the edible dormouse. These were not common field mice but a specific species, the gleis, or fat dormouse. The Romans bred them for the table in a special terracotta container called a glorarium or dolium. The Roman elite's obsession with bizarre and extravagant foods went far beyond dormice. Their feasts were a form of competitive consumption, a way to display wealth and sophistication through the sheer shock value and rarity of the ingredients served. The goal was often to surprise and overwhelm the senses of jaded guests who had seen it all. The cookbook attributed to Apicius, De Re Coquinaria, is a testament to this, containing recipes for dishes that sound like fever dreams. To understand these extravagant menus, we must look to sources like Petronius's Satyricon, which satirizes the grotesque feasts of a freedman named Trimalchio. While a work of fiction, it reflects the culinary ambitions of the newly rich. Trimalchio's feast is a masterpiece of illusion and excess. The Roman love for strong flavors meant that no part of an animal was considered waste, a philosophy we might today call nose-to-tail eating. However, for the Romans, this was not just a matter of frugality but also of culinary adventure. Offal, the internal organs and entrails of a butchered animal, was featured prominently in their cuisine, from the simplest street food stalls to the most elaborate banquets. One of the greatest challenges for the Roman cook was the preservation of food in a world without refrigeration. This necessity profoundly shaped the flavors of their diet, leading to a reliance on techniques that produced tastes we might find harsh or overwhelming. Salting was the most common method for preserving meat and fish. Pork was heavily salted to create an early form of ham and bacon. Consider the silence of the common home, far from the senatorial villas. Here, the meal is not a show but a struggle. A simple bowl holds the story of survival, of a different kind of Roman truth. Spices played a crucial and multifaceted role in Roman cooking, and their use helps explain how some of the more disgusting ingredients were made palatable. The Roman Empire was the terminus of the Silk Road and maritime trade routes, which brought a treasure trove of exotic spices from the east into their kitchens, at least for those who could afford them. Black pepper from India was the most coveted and ubiquitous spice, used in nearly every type of dish, from savory to sweet. Let's now pour a glass of Roman wine, but be warned, it would be almost unrecognizable to a modern connoisseur. Roman wine was not the light, crisp beverage we know today. It was typically thick, syrupy, and incredibly alcoholic. Grapes were often left to ripen on the vine for as long as possible, sometimes even becoming raisins, to maximize their sugar content. The Romans rarely left their wine unadulterated, even after diluting it with water. They were masters of flavoring their wine, creating a wide array of spiced and sweetened concoctions. The most popular of these was mulsum, a wine sweetened with honey, often served as an aperitif during the appetizer course of a meal. Another common practice was to create conditum paradoxum, or surprise spiced wine. While the wealthy sipped on their spiced wines, the average Roman citizen, and especially the Roman soldier, drank something far more practical and less refined: pasca. Pasca was a simple, sour beverage made by mixing water with cheap, low-quality wine that had started to turn to vinegar. It was, in essence, a vinegar-based drink. While this sounds unappetizing, it was incredibly effective for several reasons. Firstly, it was cheap and made use of wine that would otherwise be discarded. Now we must consider the strange case of silphium, a plant that represents one of history's greatest culinary mysteries. For centuries, silphium was the most sought-after culinary and medicinal plant in the ancient Mediterranean world. It grew only in a narrow coastal band in Cyrenaica, a Roman province in modern-day Libya. The plant was legendary. Its resin, stalk, and roots were all used. The Roman kitchen, or culina, was a far cry from the spacious, well-equipped rooms we know today. In the cramped urban apartments, or insulae, where most of the population lived, a kitchen might be nothing more than a small, portable charcoal brazier set up on a balcony or near a window to allow the smoke and fumes to escape. This constant exposure to smoke and soot from cooking fires was a daily reality. How did Romans perceive their own food in terms of health? Their understanding was based on the system of humoral medicine, most famously articulated by the physician Galen. This theory held that the human body was composed of four humors: blood hot and moist, phlegm cold and moist, yellow bile hot and dry, and black bile cold and dry. Health was the result of these four humors being in perfect balance. We must confront our own biases when we label Roman food as disgusting. This judgment stems from our modern palate, which has been conditioned over centuries to prefer a very different set of flavors and textures. Our cuisine largely prizes subtlety, freshness, and the natural taste of ingredients. We have a cultural aversion to decay, strong fermentation, and the consumption of many animal organs. The Romans, however, operated under a different culinary paradigm. The legacy of Roman cuisine is surprisingly resilient, and some of its disgusting flavors live on in disguise. The most direct descendant of the infamous garum can still be found today. On the Amalfi coast of Italy, a specialty condiment called colatura di alici is produced using a method remarkably similar to that of the ancient Romans. Anchovies are layered with salt in barrels and left to ferment for months before the resulting liquid is drained off. The Roman emphasis on presentation and spectacle at the banquet table also left a lasting mark. The idea of food as theater, designed to shock and entertain guests, did not die with the fall of the empire. Throughout the medieval period, aristocratic feasts featured elaborate centerpieces known as sodalties or subtleties. These were intricate sculptures, often made of sugar, wax, or pastry, depicting castles, mythological scenes, or allegorical figures. A single drop of sauce holds an empire. It tastes of the vast coastline, of the fisherman's haul, of the soldier's ration, and of the immense, complex machine that fed millions of mouths every day. Finally, the most enduring and perhaps least disgusting legacy of Roman cuisine was the dissemination of what we now call the Mediterranean triad: grapes, grains, and olives. As the Roman legions conquered new territories, they brought their agricultural practices with them. They planted vineyards in Gaul, which would eventually become the legendary wine regions of France. They introduced olive groves to Spain, turning it into a major producer of olive oil, a status it still holds today. Let us return to the vast, silent majority of the Roman Empire, for whom exotic delicacies were an impossible dream. Beyond the basic sustenance of puls and bread, what else filled the plates of the common folk? Vegetables were a crucial part of their diet. The most common were from the cabbage family, cabbage, kale, and turnips, as they were hardy and easy to grow. Legumes like chickpeas, lentils, and fava beans were also vital staples, providing an essential source of protein. What about meat for the common Roman? It was a rare luxury. Large-scale animal husbandry was expensive, and most land was dedicated to grain production. For an average city dweller, meat might be consumed only a few times a year, often in a religious context. During public festivals and sacrifices, the state or wealthy patrons would sponsor rituals where animals, usually cattle or pigs, were sacrificed to the gods. Following the ceremony, the meat would be distributed to the populace. The Roman street food scene offers a vibrant glimpse into what ordinary people ate on a daily basis. The insulae, the densely packed apartment blocks of Rome, often lacked proper kitchens. As a result, many Romans relied on thermopolia, the ancient equivalent of a modern fast food counter. These establishments had L-shaped counters with large earthenware pots, or dolia, sunk into them, which could keep hot food warm. One of the more peculiar food sources, which straddles the line between common fare and delicacy, was the snail. Snails were a well-established part of the Roman diet and were, in fact, the subject of early forms of aquaculture. Romans would create cacheria, or snail pens, to breed and fatten them for consumption. The role of olive oil in the Roman diet cannot be overstated. It was as fundamental as grain and wine. However, the quality and use of this liquid gold varied dramatically with social class. The finest oil, oleum omphaceum, was pressed from unripe green olives. It had a sharp, peppery flavor and was used as a high-end condiment by the wealthy, drizzled over salads or vegetables. When we look at the Roman diet through an archaeological lens, the evidence can be quite literally disgusting, yet incredibly revealing. The study of ancient latrines and sewers provides an unglamorous but honest picture of what people were actually eating and digesting. In places like Herculaneum, a town buried by the eruption of Vesuvius, archaeologists excavated a massive sewer drain that served an entire town block. Let's delve deeper into the Roman use of seafood. The Mediterranean was a bountiful resource, and for those living near the coast, fish was a far more common source of protein than meat. But Roman tastes in seafood were at times very specific and extravagant. While common folk ate small, fried, or salted fish, the elite craved large, rare, and expensive specimens. The red mullet, mullus, was particularly prized. These fish were not valued so much for their taste, but for their appearance as they died. Another prized sea creature that reveals the Roman penchant for unusual textures was the sea urchin, or echinus. Unlike the red mullet, which was valued for its visual spectacle, the sea urchin was all about its unique taste and texture. They were typically eaten raw, often as part of the appetizer course. The spiny outer shell would be cracked open to reveal the 5 delicate, orange-colored gonads, or roe, inside. This was the edible part. The Romans did not have sugar cane or sugar beets. Their primary sweetener was honey. This made beekeeping, or apiculture, a vital agricultural practice. Roman writers like Varro and Columella wrote extensively on the best methods for keeping bees, from the construction of hives often made of wicker, cork, or pottery, to the types of flowers that produced the best honey. Honey was used in almost every facet of their cuisine. It was used to create the sweet wine, mulsum. The butcher's block in the Forum holds no familiar cuts. Here, every part of the animal is prized. Nothing is wasted. The squeamishness of our age had no place in this world of practicality and stark necessity. What about dairy products beyond the hard, salty cheeses designed for preservation? Fresh milk from cows, goats, or sheep was consumed, but it was generally considered a rustic, simple food. more suitable for children, farmers, or barbarians than for a sophisticated urban adult. Due to the lack of refrigeration, milk would spoil quickly, making its consumption in large cities a risky affair. The Roman relationship with vegetables was complex and governed by both practicality and social status. For the poor, as we've noted, humble vegetables like cabbage, leeks, and turnips were dietary staples. The elite, however, sought out more refined and exotic varieties. One of the most prized vegetables was asparagus. Roman agriculturalists developed sophisticated methods for cultivating it, and it was a symbol of spring and luxury. Let us return to the disgusting label and examine a food that truly tested the Roman constitution. Cassus, larvae. These were large, fleshy grubs of the cassus moth, which infest the wood of trees like willow and oak. Pliny the Elder records that these grubs were considered a delicacy by some Roman epicures. They were fattened up on a diet of flour before being roasted and served as a savory snack. Food adulteration was a rampant and dangerous problem in the Roman world, a truly disgusting truth that lurked beneath the surface of the marketplace. Without regulatory bodies like a modern FDA, sellers were free to cheat their customers in a variety of ways. Wine was a frequent target. Unscrupulous merchants would add flavorings to disguise spoiled or inferior wine, and sometimes used lead-based sweeteners to mask a sour taste, with toxic results. The structure of a Roman elite dinner, the cena, was a highly ritualized affair that unfolded in 3 distinct stages, each with its own specific types of food. The first course, the gustatio or appetizer, was designed to stimulate the appetite. It typically consisted of light, savory dishes. This is where you would find eggs, olives, salads, shellfish like oysters and sea urchins, and of course, the infamous honey-glazed dormice. These would be accompanied by the honeyed wine, mulsum. The second and main course of the Roman cena was the primi mensae, or first table. This was the heart of the feast, a spectacular parade of heavily spiced and elaborately prepared dishes. It was here that the host would display their greatest culinary firepower. There would be multiple meat, poultry, and fish dishes, all brought out at once rather than in sequence as we do today. The final course of the Roman dinner was the secondi mensae, or second table, which corresponds to our dessert course. After the riot of savory and spectacular dishes, the table was cleared and reset for sweeter fare. This course, also known as dulcia, would feature fresh and dried fruits like figs, dates, and grapes. It also included various cakes and pastries, which were typically sweetened with honey and often contained nuts and cheese. What about the physical setting of these elaborate meals? The Roman elite did not sit at a dining table on chairs as we do. They reclined on couches in a room called the triclinium. The name comes from the Greek triclinia, meaning 3 couches. 3 wide couches were arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Each couch could accommodate up to 3 diners, meaning a standard formal dinner party was for 9 people. Guests would recline on their left elbow, leaving their right hand free to pick up food. While we have focused on the more shocking aspects of their diet, it's important to remember that the Romans also valued simple, rustic fare, often romanticizing it as a connection to their virtuous agricultural past. The poet Horace, for example, often contrasted the chaotic, anxiety-inducing feasts of the city with the simple pleasures of a meal at his country villa. The Roman army's diet was a logistical masterpiece, designed for efficiency, preservation, and high caloric content to fuel the empire's expansion. The staple food for a legionary was grain, primarily wheat. Each soldier was issued a daily grain ration, which they had to mill themselves using a small, portable hand mill. This flour was then used to make either a simple porridge or, more commonly, a hard, unleavened bread or biscuit known as buxulatum or hardtack. Think of sweetness, not from sugar, but from stranger sources. A sweetness that could lull the senses, a flavor enhancer so potent and so dangerous it silently poisoned the very elite who craved it most. Let's consider the lasting impact of Roman food beyond specific ingredients. Their greatest contribution may have been the very idea of a cookbook, the collection of recipes attributed to Marcus Gavius Apicius, De Re Coquinaria. is one of the oldest surviving cookbooks in Western history. While it was likely a compilation assembled over time rather than the work of a single author, it represents a monumental shift, the codification of culinary knowledge. The Roman concept of breakfast, or intaculum, was a simple and often perfunctory affair, very different from the large meals some of us are accustomed to. For many Romans, it was a light, quick meal, often consisting of leftovers from the previous night's dinner. A piece of bread, perhaps dipped in wine or olive oil, was very common. A small piece of cheese or some fruit might be included. Children might have bread with milk. Lunch, known as prandium, was also typically a light and quick meal for the Romans. It was often eaten around midday and, like breakfast, frequently consisted of leftovers from the previous evening's main meal. A Roman might have a piece of bread with cheese, some cold meat, fruit, or vegetables. It was a functional meal designed to provide energy for the second half of the working day, not a social occasion. The Romans had a deep appreciation for the art of cheesemaking, and cheese was a vital part of their diet, particularly for the army and the rural population. They developed various types of cheeses, both fresh and aged. The most common was a hard, salty cheese made from sheep's or goat's milk, which we've mentioned. Its low moisture content and high salt content made it perfect for long-term storage and transport. This is the ancestor of modern Italian cheeses like Pecorino Romano. While the Romans are famous for their wine, beer, or cervisia, was also known and consumed within the empire, though it carried a significant social stigma. Beer was the traditional beverage of the Celtic and Germanic peoples of northern Europe, lands like Gaul, Germania, and Britannia. As Rome conquered these territories, they encountered beer-drinking cultures. However, the Romans, with their deep-rooted Mediterranean identity, viewed beer as a foreign and barbaric drink. The Roman love of pork was profound. The pig was the most important animal for meat consumption, far more so than cattle. Pigs were relatively easy to raise, they reproduced quickly, and they could forage for themselves, making them an efficient source of meat. Nearly every part of the pig was eaten. We've discussed the spectacular roasted boars and the delicacies of udders and wombs, but standard cuts of pork were the basis for many meals. A disgusting aspect of Roman feasting that is often misunderstood is the vomitorium. Popular culture often depicts this as a room where Romans would go to intentionally vomit during a banquet so they could return to eat more. This is a myth. The word vomitorium, in a Roman context, actually referred to the large passageways in a theater or amphitheater. These passages were designed to allow a vast crowd of people to exit the venue quickly, to spew forth the audience, so to speak. The Roman attitude towards sweetness reveals a palate quite different from our own. Without refined sugar, their sweet flavors came from a limited number of sources, primarily honey and fruit. They also learned to concentrate the natural sugars in grapes by boiling down grape juice to create a thick, sweet syrup called defrutum, or sapa. This syrup was used extensively as a sweetener in both sweet and savory cooking. The tools of the Roman diner were simple and few. The primary eating utensil was one's own hands. Food was therefore prepared in the kitchen to be easily handled. Meats were pre-cut, and many dishes had a stew-like or porridge-like consistency. For liquids or saucy items, spoons were used. The Romans had two main types of spoons. The ligula was a larger spoon with a pear-shaped bowl used for soups and stews. Water was the most essential drink of all, and the Romans engineered magnificent systems to provide it. The famous aqueducts were marvels of engineering, carrying fresh water from distant springs over miles of countryside to supply the city's public fountains, baths, and the homes of the wealthy. Having access to a steady supply of clean water was a mark of Roman civilization and a major public health advantage. However, the safety of this water could be compromised.